What is a true fact so baffling it should be false? Story 1. The Life of Francelick, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. January 1962, Frane was riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died while he escaped with a broken arm and hypothermia. 1963. On his first plane trip, he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were killed in the crash. 1966. He was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 4 passengers drowned while he only received some minor cuts and bruises. 1970. His car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. 1973. In yet another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. This caused flames to shoot through the air vents, singeing off all of his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. 1995. He was hit by a bus but only sustained minor injuries. 1996. To escape a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve, he swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed onto a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice it to say, the guy had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. He also won the lottery, I think. Story 2. If you're launching from Earth, the most difficult place to reach in the solar system is the Sun. The reason for this is that to fly directly into the Sun, you need to first launch from Earth, and then remove all your orbital velocity around the Sun. Anything less will just put you into a different orbit around the Sun rather than directly into it. The amount of power required for that to do it directly is basically impossible currently. As an alternative, you could, for relatively little power, fly all the way out to Pluto distance, slow down much less, and then fall back into the Sun. The trade-off being the travel time is now about 90 years. Other in-between paths could get you there for different balances of energy and time, but all of them are tougher than getting basically anywhere else in the solar system with an equivalent balance. There's a mission currently traveling to study the Sun, the Parker Solar Probe. It won't be flying directly in, but plans to make the closest passes than any probe ever has. It's going to make 7 passes by Venus to shed speed so it can get closer and closer to the Sun. The full flight time is planned as just less than 7 years. Story 3. A morbidly obese person can survive absolute starvation without any sickness or feeling ill, under close control. There have been studies since the 60s. There was a patient in 1973 who went under a 382-day starvation diet for therapeutic purposes, under close control with only vitamin and mineral supplements and water intake without protein, carbohydrate, or fat intake. No food at all. Dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms and maintained it. After a follow-up checkup 5 years later, the patient was 96 kilograms, stabilized. Prolonged fasting had no ill effects. If anybody's curious about the article, the PubMed ID is PMC2495396. Keep in mind, for anyone tempted to imitate, multiple others attempted this after him and wound up dead. Do not try this at home. Story 4. There was this French guy named Telha in the late 1700s that could eat anything, in any amount. He was able to eat a quarter of a cow in one day and ate dinner for 15 for one meal when he was being tested. He was even able to swallow an entire eel, with bones included, without hesitating. Story 5. Spearfish, South Dakota, holds the world record for the fastest recorded temperature change. On January 22, 1943, at about 7:30 a.m. MST, the temperature in Spearfish was -4 degrees Fahrenheit, or -20 degrees Celsius. The Chinook wind picked up speed rapidly, and 2 minutes later, 7:32 a.m., the temperature was 45 degrees Fahrenheit, or 7 degrees Celsius, above zero. The 49 degrees Fahrenheit, or 27 degrees Celsius rise in 2 minutes set a world record that still holds. By 9 a.m., the temperature had risen to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, or 12 degrees Celsius. Suddenly, the Chinook died down and the temperature tumbled back to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, or -20 degrees Celsius. The 58 degrees Fahrenheit, or 32.2 degrees Celsius drop took only 27 minutes. Story 6. As many people died in the First Battle of Bull Run, alternatively the First Battle of Manassas, as in the entire Revolutionary War. The Civil War resulted in more American deaths, 620,000, than both world wars combined, 521,000. The scale of the conflict is hard to truly grasp. These numbers seem to be questionable. I got this from the museum at Manassas. The takeaway for me is that the Civil War was a lot bigger than a lot of people realize. Story 7. Hunting animals can sometimes lead to larger populations of that same animal. The idea of a carrying capacity exists because there's a limit to the speed of which resources cycle or become available. When a population is above carrying capacity, the population will decrease as individuals starve. What is important is that these individuals don't just die. They'll try to survive, and in doing so, will reduce the number of available resources to others while still failing to reproduce. By culling animal populations back to the carrying capacity, ethical hunters can actually help the population by reducing the number of eating animals to a sustainable one, and ensuring a better distribution of resources, preventing a population crash. Story 8. Literally any fact about neutron stars. Such incredible and wonderfully wacky objects. I've done a little bit of research and I wanted to share with you some of my favorite neutron star facts, as I realized I've not actually answered the question at all, really. Due to the conservation of angular momentum, when a star collapses into a neutron star, the neutron star itself often begins to rotate very quickly. The fastest rotating neutron star we know of spins over 700 times a second, or at 0.24 c. Some neutron stars have extremely strong magnetic fields, sometimes of up to 1011 Tesla, a few quadrillion times the strength of Earth's magnetic field. This makes them non-ideal holiday destinations, as the field could wipe your credit card strip at a distance of over 192,000 kilometers. We know neutron stars are dense, exceptionally dense, sometimes up to 1,017 kilograms per cubic meter. To put that in perspective, a 1 cubic centimeter piece of neutron star would weigh the same as a solid cube of iron, 700 meters across, about the same height as the Burj Khalifa. The gravitational field of a neutron star is also frankly ridiculous, around 200 billion times stronger than Earth's. If you dropped an object from 1 meter above the surface, it would accelerate to over 7 million kilometers per hour before it hit the star. This intense gravitational field also means that the maximum surface irregularities are about 5 millimeters, so not great for mountaineering. Neutron star cores are still pretty much a mystery to us. We think we have an idea of what goes on, but it's very weird stuff. Under these sorts of conditions, matter is about as dense as it can ever be before collapsing into a black hole. We believe that matter exists as a sort of ultra-dense soup of superfluid neutrons. Or, at higher densities, neutrons themselves dissociate into their constituent quarks and we have an ultra-dense quark-gluon plasma. This stuff is exceptionally weird. Story 9. The number 15 Burger King foot lettuce. The last thing you'd want in your Burger King burger is someone's foot fungus. As it turns out, that might be what you get. A 4chan uploaded a photo anonymously to the site showcasing his feet in a plastic bin of lettuce, with the statement, "This is the lettuce you eat at Burger King." Admittedly, he had shoes on, but that's even worse. The post went live at 11:38 p.m. on July 16, and a mere 20 minutes later, the Burger King in question was alerted to the rogue employee. At least I hope he's rogue. How did it happen? Well, the BK employee hadn't removed the EXIF data from the uploaded photo, which suggested the culprit was somewhere in Mayfield Heights, Ohio. This was at 11:47. 3 minutes later at 11:50, the Burger King branch address was posted with wishes of happy unemployment. 5 minutes later, the news station was contacted by another 4chan, and 3 minutes later at 11:58, a link was posted. BK's Tell Us About Us online forum. The foot photo, otherwise known as Exhibit A, was attached. Cleveland Scene magazine contacted the BK in question the next day. When questioned, the breakfast shift manager said, "Oh, I know who that is. He's getting fired." Mystery solved by 4chan. Now we can all go back to eating our fast food in peace. Story 10. Humans have an involuntary self-defense mechanism, wherein if the human in question is nervous, it will secrete a foul-smelling odor via its sweat. On the topic of primatology, chimpanzees have vastly superior short-term memory than humans. After looking at a screen full of numbers for a fraction of a second, they can perfectly tap where the numbers were in incorrect counting order, even with the other numbers missing. It would take a human well over 30 seconds to memorize a screen in the same way. Oh, and also, each one of an octopus's suckers can lift 10 pounds per 1 inch of diameter. A female giant Pacific octopus has about 280 suckers per arm, the largest being 3 inches in diameter and the smallest being less than a single centimeter. If we assume the mean diameter of the octopus's suckers is 1 inch, a single female O. vulgaris can move about 22,400 pounds, assuming it can move all of its suction cups in a single direction in unison. More impressive is how much an average human male could potentially move, that being 30,000, assuming all muscles are working in one direction in unison. I know these are technically 4 facts, but I find each of them fascinating. Story 11. One man did more to destroy the world's environment than any other. Thomas Midgley Jr. was responsible for inventing tetraethyl lead, aka leaded gasoline, and the first CFC, chlorofluorocarbons, Freon. Both would be banned and phased out in the 1970s and 80s due to their effects in human life. Lead poisoning was causing huge health problems in America, while Freon was especially responsible for the depletion of the ozone layer. One researcher said that no other organism on Earth was responsible for as much environmental destruction as Midgley. But at the same time, in 1940, at the age of 51, Midgley contracted poliomyelitis, which left him severely disabled. He devised an elaborate system of ropes and pulleys to lift himself out of bed. In 1944, he became entangled in the device and died of strangulation. Story 12. The Cabrini Green public housing projects in the nicer-ish side of Chicago marked their housing numbers with ugly, bleak-looking black stenciled spray paint on concrete. When someone pointed out that they should use metal numbers instead of spray paint, since not only would they look much nicer, but they would actually be cheaper to maintain, the city replied that housing projects were supposed to look somewhat utilitarian, and if they looked too good, the richer and whiter residents of Chicago would complain. The city was spending extra money on an uglier option just so it wouldn't look too nice and upset rich white people. Story 13. Haven't seen any of these yet. The slow loris, a nocturnal primate, is both poisonous and venomous. Glands on its elbows secrete a toxin that, if eaten, poisons its killer. The loris licks its elbows, populating its mouth with this toxin, making it venomous as well, mimicking the toxicity of a viper. Quote-unquote monkey sounds used as sound effects in movies are usually recorded from the rock hyrax, a rodent-looking animal related to the elephant. Many reptiles and amphibians can go through parthenogenesis. That is, when environmental conditions are ideal, females can naturally clone themselves, impregnating themselves without the need to mate with a male. The genes often exhibit mutations and are not exact replicas, keeping the gene pool variable and allowing for these clones to produce offspring as well. The mitochondria of the cell contain a double membrane and can multiply on their own. Why muscle cells have higher numbers of mitochondria than, say, skin cells? It also has different DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, than the nucleus, most of which is inherited directly from the maternal line and thus used heavily in genetic research. It is believed that the mitochondria were actually its own organism that was engulfed by a single-cell organism, explaining the double membrane and varying genetic material. Over time, it created a symbiotic relationship with single-cell organisms, eventually just becoming part of the cell. Story 14. Olfaction. Our sense of smell is what is responsible for our sense of flavors, not the tongue. The tongue can taste sweet, sour, umami, etc., but understanding the complex flavor of, say, an apple requires retronasal olfaction. There is an odorant that is primarily responsible for the flavor of butter, called butanedione. When inhaled while paired with an image of food, your brain believes this food to be savory. However, butanedione is the same molecule that is primarily responsible for the perception of body odor. When inhaled while paired with the image of a person, your brain will tell you that the smell is coming from their armpits. Story 15. Samoset, the first Native American to contact the Pilgrims, said, essentially, "Hello, do you have any beer?" In English, the Pilgrims arrived in 1621, 14 years after Jamestown. Just as a sense of when the English were establishing themselves, he had already learned English and became familiar with their customs from encounters with English cod fishing ships. Squanto, who aided the Pilgrims and helped liaise between the natives and Pilgrims, was fluent in English. He had already made 4 transatlantic journeys and lived in London for around 9 years. He was kidnapped in 1605 and sold into slavery in Spain, but ultimately freed by monks. He made his way to London, learned English, and hired himself on an expedition to Newfoundland. This was not close enough to home, so he sailed back to London and worked another voyage that would get him to New England. Tragically, his tribe had been killed by the plague by the time he finally got home. Thus, Squanto found himself living among the Wampanoag. When the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, he had 13 years of experience with the English. This made him uniquely well-suited to serve as an intermediary and diplomat between the groups. Story 16. The transatlantic is the universe's motion of naturally slowing to a halt. In the end, the only thing around will be atoms that are evaporating after the heat. Living organisms will be dead, all stars will be gone, even black holes will have blown up into beauty, leaving only lights in its wake. By this time, all Homo sapiens, members of the great ape family, will have gone extinct, if they have not already found a way to escape their impending and never-ending doom by escaping the universe. Our planet Earth will be nothing but meaningless matter inside and orbiting the corpse of our once beautiful and glorious planet. So the Boltzmann brain will have appeared billions of years before the death of our not-so-glorious cosmos. The last thing in our universe will be one massive black hole. After an indescribable amount of time, the last thing will be photons cooling to absolute zero as the universe expands on itself. After everything is cooled, after everything dies, after everything decays including atoms and photons, the universe has achieved a state of motionlessness and the universe ends and boom. Everything we've ever loved, hated, wanted, envied, thought, made, said, to the universe we were in imbalance. We were wrong. The universe never wanted to move everything, just did atoms buzzing around making cosmic disturbances. Sons, the universe started with a bang and ended with a bright light and a smile of joy in the face of the cosmic being who controls all. Most people say it would be nice to live other lives after death, but in reality, death is the common goal of our universe, and to deny it would be greedy and ungrateful. Just like a depressed college student, the universe didn't want to be born, but was rather subject to a cruel awakening, like when you're sleeping and a little one says they're hungry after 3 rounds of spaghetti. I hope this doesn't make you sad, but rather happy. We all have a purpose in life. We all die to serve a greater union, the motionlessness of our atoms, so accept it with grace. For you are a servant to an opulence. Everything will die in a bright light, and to die is to serve the higher power of the universe, so bathe in the knowledge of scholars. Story 17. Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, in what is considered to be one of history's most unlucky breaks. Princip was one of 7 people that conspired to kill Archduke, but the official attempt to assassinate Franz Ferdinand along his motorcade route failed. Princip got a miraculous second chance to assassinate Franz Ferdinand later that day and completed the job. How? 7 conspirators lined the route with the intent to kill Franz Ferdinand when his motorcade passed. The first conspirator was spooked by a nearby policeman and didn't act. The second conspirator threw a hand grenade at the Archduke's car. The driver noticed an object flying towards him and sped away. The grenade exploded under the wheel of another car in the motorcade. 2 occupants of that car, along with a dozen spectators, were injured by the grenade shrapnel. The grenade thrower swallowed a cyanide capsule and jumped into the Miljacker River. But the cyanide pill was ineffective and the river was only 4 inches deep. He was captured by the police. After the grenade exploded, the crowds lining the streets panicked and the remaining cars in the motorcade sped off, costing the 5 remaining conspirators the opportunity to assassinate the Archduke. The 5 remaining conspirators dispersed. Ferdinand and his wife made their way to the city hall, then later decided to go to the hospital to visit the victims of the grenade attack. On the way to the hospital, the driver of Ferdinand's car took the wrong route and made a wrong turn onto a narrow side street. Realizing his mistake, the driver braked and began to reverse. In doing so, he seized the engine of the vehicle. This happened in front of Schiller's Delicatessen, which happened to be the exact spot where Gavrilo Princip was standing at that moment. Princip, noticing the vehicle and its occupants, pulled his pistol and fired 2 shots at point-blank range into the car, hitting Franz Ferdinand in the neck and then Sophie in the abdomen, killing them both. Princip then swallowed his cyanide pill, but it too was ineffective and he was captured. Story 18. In relativistic physics, as you travel faster, your relative time to those around you exponentially slows down. Slowly at first, but becomes intensely noticeable as you approach c, which is the speed of light. The same thing happens near objects with massive gravity wells, e.g. Interstellar's black hole. So assuming you have some method of preventing your mass from killing you, literally your mass also exponentially increases as you travel faster, you can jump to the far future simply by traveling for 1 minute near the speed of light. Here's a good conversion factor for you. If you were to travel at 99.8% of c, 1 minute of your relative time would equate to roughly 49 days Earth time. And at 99.14% of c, traveling for 1 minute, you'd end up 49,105 days or 135 years in the future. Now, if you thought that was crazy, here's where it gets real. As you get even closer to c, say 99.1 your relative time to Earth would be so slow that to an outside observer, you and your, presumably, spaceship would be moving at a snail's pace. Why? Well, do you remember that equation d equals vt from 8th grade physics? If you rearrange that, you get v equals d over t. Think about it. The difference in distance traveled in a minute at 99.89% of c and 99.1 of c is basically nothing. 100 kilometers of difference is negligible compared to the 18 billion kilometers you'd be traveling, so we can say that distance d is constant. Now you may think that time t is also constant, since you're always traveling for 1 minute. But remember, that's your relative time, not Earth's relative time. So to our aforementioned outside observer, you'd be traveling for vastly larger times for each extra 9 after the decimal. So at 99.1 of c, you'd have around the same d value as before and a preposterously large t value, meaning that, given v equals d over t, your speed relative to the rest of the universe would be unimaginably slow. Forget snail's pace, at 99.9 of c, you'd appear stationary. This is one of the few paradoxes in physics that show why matter can't travel at or faster than c. Time slows down relative to you as you travel close to c, to the point in which it looks like you're not moving. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this next video. The YouTube algorithm really thinks you like it.